"Don't sign it, these projects are a lie," she pointed, and his smile vanished. The Mont Blanc pen in Malcolm Hayes's hand froze mid-stroke. His signature, half-formed on the dotted line, hovered in the quiet tension of the Hayes Global boardroom like a threat not yet delivered. He looked up. At the door stood a girl young, maybe 16, faded gray hoodie, sneakers with frayed laces, and a visitor badge that swayed gently from her neck. Her hand was still extended, finger pointing toward the contract in front of him. The entire room went still. Mark Ellison, the smooth-talking developer across the table, tilted his head. Celeste, Malcolm's ex-wife and former co-founder, let out a thin sigh. Jordan, Malcolm's assistant, started to rise but paused mid-motion. Malcolm narrowed his eyes. "Excuse me?" The girl didn't step back. That land lot 117A was already marked for public redevelopment by the city. It's in the master zoning plan. If you sign that contract, your investment gets buried with it. You'll lose everything. Silence. Then Ellison chuckled. "Is this some kind of joke?" Malcolm slowly stood. The room wasn't warm, but he could feel a prickling heat crawling up the back of his neck. "Who are you?" "Maya Williams. My mom's part of the cleaning crew. I help her on the night shift sometimes. I saw that contract left in the copier tray earlier this week. I checked it against the zoning registry. Someone's lying to you." Her voice was calm, precise. There was no trace of embarrassment, no trembling, just facts. "You're accusing my client of fraud?" Ellison said with an amused scoff. "From behind a mop bucket?" But Maya had already stepped forward. She placed a thin folder on the edge of the conference table. "You don't have to take my word for it. Everything's in there. But if you sign that," she looked Malcolm in the eye, "your signature will bury millions in the wrong dirt." She gave a small nod, turned, and walked out the door, leaving a stunned silence behind her. 10 minutes later, the boardroom emptied, murmurs of confusion and discomfort trailing behind each executive. Mark Ellison's jaw was tight, but he forced a smile before leaving. "We'll talk tomorrow," he said, the edge in his voice failing to hide his irritation. Celeste lingered near the door. "Don't let a teenager's conspiracy theory cost you everything we built, Malcolm. Think carefully." Then she was gone too. Malcolm remained alone, standing beneath the cold glow of recessed lighting, staring at the closed folder Maya had left behind. Later that evening, his penthouse high above the city buzzed with quiet light. Malcolm stood at the kitchen island, tie loosened, sleeves rolled, but still rigid with thought. The folder sat open beside a glass of untouched bourbon. Maya's note was handwritten in blue ink. "That lot's already part of the city's redevelopment plan. If you sign this, your money's going to sink and disappear." He stared at the words. It wasn't legal jargon. It was a warning, a clear, unapologetic warning. And it was correct. At 9:32 p.m., his phone buzzed. A message from Celeste. "Malcolm, we're about to lose this deal if you don't sign by tomorrow. Don't overthink this. You know what's at stake." Celeste always knew what buttons to push. Once, they built dreams together, brick by brick. Now, she was just another voice in the crowd telling him to hurry up and close the deal. But Malcolm had learned too many times that what's rushed is often what burns you. He picked up his tablet, pulled the zoning registry from the city's official portal, and searched Lot 117A. It was there, highlighted in red, designated as a future public development site with eminent domain protections attached. If Hayes Global signed on as a private partner for something that conflicted with city zoning, the permits would be rejected, the funds would lock up, and the land? Gone. By midnight, Malcolm had pulled up every document on the project he could find. Parcel B, Lot 117A, quiet zoning maneuvers, no formal hearing, no public input, but a clear record that no one had dared question, except a girl in a gray hoodie. At 1:12 a.m., Malcolm stood alone in his office, lights of Chicago casting sharp shadows on the polished floor. He held the pen again, but not to sign. He set it down beside the contract. Then he picked up his phone. "Jordan," he said when his assistant answered groggy, "cancel tomorrow's signing, and get me everything we have on Mark Ellison's prior partnerships. I want it all by 8 a.m. A Pause. Understood." Malcolm hung up. Then, quietly, he looked out over the sleeping city. One voice had made him stop. One finger pointing at the truth had turned everything. And for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel cornered. Have felt ready. Malcolm Hayes never liked being wrong. But what unsettled him more deep down was the thought that a 16-year-old might have seen through a $1 million deception before he did. He stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office at 7:46 a.m., staring out across the gray sprawl of Chicago. The city was waking up, steam from manholes rising like breath from underground lungs, buses rumbling past shuttered cafes, and morning joggers threading through pockets of cold wind. Somewhere down there was Lot 117A, and a ticking bomb disguised as a redevelopment deal. Behind him, the contract lay unopened on his desk. Maya's folder sat beside it, untouched since last night, but no longer ignored. At precisely 8 a.m., Jordan Lee entered the office, balancing 2 coffees and an iPad under his arm. His eyes looked tired, but his expression was alert. "I ran the background you asked for," he said, placing the coffee down. Mark Ellison's had 3 major development deals in the past 5 years. 2 of them ended in quiet dissolutions. One resulted in a lawsuit sealed by settlement. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" "New Orleans, 2019. Rezoning irregularities. Very similar pattern. Targeted public land. Rushed permitting. Paperwork pushed through under political pressure. The mayor's deputy resigned 2 months after." Malcolm exhaled slowly. "So he's done this before?" Jordan nodded. "And our deal? The Parcel B zoning change happened 6 weeks ago. It's buried in the city's master plan, marked as pending redevelopment under public-private review." Meaning if we sign this," Malcolm said, "our capital gets frozen in litigation, and we lose every cent we put down." Jordan didn't speak. He didn't have to. Later that morning, Malcolm closed his office door and dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. Then, "Hello?" The voice on the other end was cautious, soft. "Mrs. Williams? This is Malcolm Hayes." A pause. Then, "Mr. Hayes, I wasn't expecting your call. I'd like to speak with you, in person, if you're available." They met an hour later in a quiet corner of the Hayes Global Employee Lounge. Evelyn Williams wore a navy cardigan and pressed slacks, hair pinned back neatly. Her presence was calm, but her eyes carried the tired weight of someone used to being overlooked. Malcolm greeted her with a firm handshake and waited until they were seated. "I wanted to speak to you about your daughter," he began. "Maya." Evelyn's expression tightened. "Is she in trouble?" "No," Malcolm said quickly. She's the reason I didn't sign that contract last night." Evelyn looked up sharply. "You believed her?" "I checked everything. She was right." The older woman sat back slowly. "She's always been like that. Quiet, but sharp. Picks up things other people miss." Malcolm studied her face. "Did you know the contract was flawed?" "I suspected," Evelyn admitted. "A few nights ago, I heard Miss Celeste and Mr. Ellison in the hallway after hours. They didn't know I was nearby. He told her the city's new plan might interfere with the launch, but they agreed not to disclose it." "And you didn't come forward?" "I've seen what happens to people who speak up in places like this," she said softly. "But Maya, she's not afraid of being dismissed." Malcolm nodded slowly. "I owe her more than I can say." Evelyn reached into her purse and slid a second file across the table. "She stayed up last night. Said you might need more." He opened it. Inside were highlighter-marked maps, time-stamped zoning links, and a scribbled note. "The money isn't just at risk. They're trying to use you to legalize the lie." Malcolm stared at it. 16. And already sharper than half the consultants he'd paid 6 figures to. That afternoon, the boardroom at Hayes Global turned into a furnace. 12 directors, perfectly groomed and perfectly impatient, sat flanked by glowing tablets and polished coffee mugs. Celeste was there too, poised in ivory silk, her voice honeyed and confident. "I think we've all heard enough rumors," she began. "It's time to move forward." But Malcolm didn't take his usual seat at the head of the table. He stood instead, a thick file in hand, calm and firm. "We won't be signing anything today," he said. A few heads turned. Mark Ellison blinked. "Malcolm, what's going on?" "This deal is compromised," Malcolm said. "The land in question, Lot 117, eyes already designated for municipal redevelopment. That makes our agreement with you invalid." Celeste's smile remained. but her eyes flashed something colder. Who told you that? He held up the file. City records, public data, verified against your proposal. There's a conflict tone that, if signed, would bury this company in lawsuits. A low murmur rippled through the board. Mark scoffed. With all due respect, Malcolm, you're taking zoning advice from a janitor's daughter. Malcolm locked eyes with him. Yes, and she just saved us millions. That night, Malcolm sat in his office alone. The lights of the city blinked around him. Chicago vast and alive, every flicker of neon and street lamp a story unfolding. He pulled Maya's folder from his briefcase one more time and placed it in the center of his desk, beside the unsigned contract. He didn't smile, but his jaw relaxed. Someone had tried to buy his silence. A girl in sneakers and a hoodie had made sure he didn't sell it. Malcolm adjusted his cufflinks and looked into the boardroom like a man walking into a courtroom. His steps were measured, calm on the surface. But inside, his mind spun like a loaded chamber because today, bullets would fly. He had spent the morning preparing for this. Not just the facts, the tone, the restraint, the steel behind his words. Because men like Mark Ellison didn't fold from evidence alone, they folded when they lost control of the room. And Celeste? Celeste never let go of control without a fight. Let's make this quick, she said, barely waiting for the last chair to pull out. Her voice was smooth as a blade. We all have numbers to meet this quarter. Mark Ellison was already standing beside the wall monitor, remote in hand, his tailored suit perfect, teeth whiter than necessary. Gentlemen, he began, and ladies, what we're looking at is a transformative moment for the South Side. Not just for our company, but for the city. The screen lit up with a slick 3D rendering, elegant glass towers rising over a sunny plaza, families strolling beneath brand new awnings, green space everywhere. A $58 million injection into underused property, he continued, turning blight into brilliance. And with zoning on our side, it's ready for groundbreaking within 90 days. Malcolm said nothing. He waited. Mr. Hayes? Asked Director Lawrence. You've had time to review the final documents. Are you prepared to move forward with the signing? Malcolm stood, calmly placing a folder on the table. Actually, I'm prepared to ask this board to halt the vote. A quiet stir passed across the room. Mark turned slightly, smile fading. Celeste didn't blink. May I ask why? Malcolm opened the folder and slid a printed zoning record across the table toward the general counsel. Because Lot 117A is not available for private development. It's already included in the city's master redevelopment plan. Anyone who invests in that land is throwing good money into a legal pit. Another beat of silence. Then Mark laughed. That's incorrect. I've seen the city's map myself. I know, Malcolm cut in. The version you submitted is outdated. Conveniently. He held up a second sheet, Maya's printout, signed and time-stamped. This is the official version, updated 6 weeks ago. Your copy left out the addendum where the lot was designated for municipal redevelopment under public interest. Celeste's hands remained folded, but her knuckles were white. You're implying deception, Malcolm? No, he said coldly. I'm confirming it. The board erupted into whispers and exchanged glances. We need to verify this, Director Huang murmured. If it's true, it is true, Malcolm said. I confirmed it last night through the city's planning office. And I have emails from a senior zoning officer verifying that any contract we sign tied to Ellison's version will be void upon submission. Celeste's voice dropped, silk now gone from its tone. Why didn't you bring this to us earlier? Because I was still hoping someone else in this room would have, he said, staring at her. Ellison tried to pivot. Even if the lot is in limbo, the majority of the land remains clear. There's still opportunity. No, Malcolm said. You misrepresented the core of the deal. That land was the anchor. Remove it, and the whole project collapses. He looked around the room, not as a man defending himself, but as a man issuing a warning. I'm not going to let this company walk into a trap. I built this firm from scratch 23 years, and I've never once signed a contract I didn't believe in. I'm not starting today. Silence fell again, and then came the shift. Director Nolan leaned forward. Who else knew about this zoning issue? All eyes slowly turned to Celeste. She smiled, but this time, it didn't reach her eyes. Mark and I discussed contingencies, yes, but we weren't hiding anything. Zoning maps change all the time. We plan to file an appeal. Malcolm folded his arms. Without notifying the board? She didn't answer. The board adjourned without a vote. Malcolm walked out of the room without looking back, the folder still in his hand. That evening, the city glowed through the glass walls of his office like a sea of restless fire. He sat at his desk, alone, the buzz of his phone silent for the first time in days. The unsigned contract still sat beside Maya's folder. He reached over and closed it gently. Then he pulled out a photo from his drawer, him and Celeste, younger, standing in front of the company's first office. He stared at it for a moment, then slid it into a drawer and locked it. Some truths couldn't be undone. Some trust, once cracked, never fit back together. At 10:17 p.m., he typed a short message and hit send. To Maya Williams. Subject: Thank you. You didn't just stop a bad deal. You stopped me from betraying everything this company was built on. I owe you more than you know. And with that, Malcolm Hayes leaned back in his chair and exhaled. He had just faced the most hostile board meeting of his career. But for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel compromised. Have felt clean. The elevator doors closed behind Malcolm with a dull metallic thud, sealing him into silence. His fingers clenched around the strap of his briefcase as the elevator glided upward through the corporate spine of Hayes Global. It was 6:12 a.m. The office building was still half asleep, just the cleaning crews and a few early risers moving like ghosts through the halls. He wasn't here for meetings, not yet. He was here for answers. And there was only one place to start. The original version of the Ellison contract, the one his legal department had quietly revised before presenting it to the board. He stepped into the executive records room, bypassed the assistant's desk, and keyed in his passcode. The file vault hissed open. Row after row of legal binders and archival drives lined the walls like soldiers standing guard. Malcolm slid on his reading glasses, pulled the contract binder, and laid it on the work table. He flipped to page 18. Lot 117A. The clause Maya had warned him about was still there, buried in vague language, with a footnote referencing a zoning map that had been updated after the contract was drafted. And yet, no amendment, no flag, no legal caveat. He frowned. If this had made it past legal, someone had either been paid or was working with Ellison. He reached for his phone and dialed. Jordan, wake up. I need a zoning attorney. Private, off the books, and fast. By 9:30 a.m., the attorney had arrived. Her name was Tara Mendez, a sharp, discreet lawyer Malcolm had worked with once during a non-disclosure dispute with a tech vendor. She wore no makeup, carried a battered leather satchel, and spoke with the clarity of someone who didn't waste words. Malcolm handed her the contract. Page 18, Lot 117A. Tell me what I'm looking at. Tara read silently, page by page. Then she opened her laptop, pulled up the city zoning code, and compared line by line. After 15 minutes, she looked up. This clause is deliberate misdirection, she said. The document references a zoning category that no longer exists for that parcel. The city reclassified it for public redevelopment, which means any private contract tied to it becomes invalid by default. Malcolm rubbed his temple. Could someone in legal have missed that? She shook her head. Only if they were asleep, or bribed, or both. He leaned back in his chair, the weight pressing heavier. So if I had signed, you would have lost millions in due diligence fees, legal exposure, and likely been tied up in litigation for years. Later that afternoon, a voice message appeared on his office line. It was Maya. Her tone was nervous, but clear. Mr. Hayes, I hope it's okay that I left this message. I know you've got people to look into this properly, but I think you should check Parcel B's northern perimeter. There's a sublot that wasn't mentioned in the contract, but it's been on the city's early demolition list for months. It doesn't show on the proposal, but I saw it on a maintenance map. He replayed the message twice. Sublot? He immediately called Tara back. Find the latest city planning map, look for hidden subdivisions under Parcel B. Anything that doesn't appear in the Ellison proposal. 30 minutes later, she returned, holding her laptop open to a zoning schematic. There, she pointed. Lot 117AB. Listed as reserved for city transportation expansion. It was never part of the saleable plot. And it's in the footprint of the proposed development. Malcolm said flatly. She nodded. Exactly. They were banking on the board, not digging deep enough to notice. They were going to build on land the city already owns. That night, Malcolm sat alone in the company library of the only places in the building with no cameras. Just wood-paneled walls, leather chairs, and silence. He opened his laptop, stared at the outline of Parcel B glowing on the screen, and took a long breath. It wasn't just about corporate fraud anymore. This was deliberate asset misrepresentation, possibly wire fraud, and if campaign funds were involved in greasing these zoning changes, then this wasn't just about Ellison. This could go deeper. Much deeper. Just past 11 p.m., he received a message from Evelyn Williams. Simple, short. They know, Maya spoke up. 2 men were parked outside our apartment tonight. They didn't get out, but they watched for hours. Malcolm froze. He dialed instantly. Evelyn picked up on the first ring. She sounded calm, but her voice wavered slightly. I filed a police report, she said. They said they'd do extra patrols, but I just wanted you to know something's happening. Malcolm's voice dropped. I'll take care of it. No, sir. You already have, Evelyn replied. Just keep her safe. I will, Malcolm said. I promise you that. He hung up, then dialed his head of security. Put a team outside the Williams building. Now, quiet, armed, no mistakes. At midnight, Malcolm stood in front of the same window where this had all begun. Only now, the skyline felt different. He could see the outline of the south side glowing dimly in the distance. An area always promised hope, but rarely protected from the price of development. He thought about Maya, a teenager with nothing, no credentials, no seat at the table, who had walked into a boardroom and saved him from a disaster that grown men had orchestrated with briefcases and lies. And now, someone was watching her. Not on my watch, Malcolm muttered. This wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon. Malcolm wasn't scheduled for any meetings. No press, no board members. Just a single task: trace the money trail. He had his legal team pulling property records, his zoning attorney reviewing every footnote in Ellison's prior deals, and security watching Maya's building from a discreet black SUV. But something still gnawed at him, the same instinct that had kept him alive in corporate warfare for 20 years. Something didn't add up, and he knew where to start looking. Celeste. She was always too smooth in the boardroom. Her eyes never flickered, not even when the zoning fraud was exposed. She hadn't denied the timeline, hadn't defended the contract, just moved on. Like someone confident she wasn't in real danger. That meant she was either bluffing or protected. At 3:11 p.m., Malcolm stepped out of his car 2 blocks from her favorite spot, Marseille on Monroe, an upscale cafe where she used to plan investor meetings and photo ops for their foundation. He didn't announce himself, didn't bring Jordan, just walked, slowly, cautiously, and when he reached the corner window, he stopped cold. Inside, tucked into a private booth near the glass, sat Celeste, elegant as ever in a bone-white coat, legs crossed, sipping espresso. Opposite her, laughing quietly, was Mark Ellison. They weren't negotiating. They weren't tense. They were familiar. His hand brushed her wrist as he reached for the sugar. She leaned in, whispered something that made him grin like a boy stealing from the cookie jar. Malcolm's stomach turned. It wasn't just business. It was collusion. He raised his phone and snapped 2 quick photos, shaky, but clear. Timestamped. Geotagged. Evidence. Back in his car, he stared at the images. They weren't intimate in the physical sense, no kisses, no touches out of place. But the proximity, the ease, the timing, it all screamed betrayal. Not just to him, to the company, to every investor who had put their trust in the mission of Hayes Global. His phone buzzed. A message from Maya. Mr. Hayes, check the developer application for Parcel B. There's a line item that references utility rerouting, except the company listed doesn't exist. I traced the business license dates registered to a residential address. You might want to look into it. Malcolm stared at the message, then read it again. The girl was relentless. He pulled up the document she referenced, page 11 of the infrastructure appendix, and found the company name, Northbridge Gridworks, LLC. 5 minutes of digging and it was confirmed. No active licenses, no public records, just a shell corporation tied to a townhouse in Winnetka. And worse, Ellison's name was listed as the emergency contact on the LLC filing. By 6 p.m., the scope of the deception had doubled. Not only had Ellison misrepresented zoning and misfiled site plans, she'd padded the budget with fake subcontractors, funneled money into a ghost company. And Celeste had likely known the entire time, possibly helped arrange it. Malcolm stared out the window of his office, the sky bleeding into shades of late winter amber. His chest was tight, not from rage, from resolve. It was time to act, quietly, efficiently. At 6:42 p.m., he met with Tara Mendez again, this time in the basement parking structure. No paper trail, no email threads. He handed her the photos, the zoning discrepancies, the fake LLC data. "Build me a case," he said. "A real one, ironclad, civil and criminal." Tara scanned the files quickly, eyes narrowing. "You're going to war?" "I'm already in it," he said. "I just finally know who the enemy is." She nodded. "This'll take a few days, but when I'm done, the DA will listen. They won't have a choice." That night, Malcolm drove himself to the south side. No driver, no security detail, just him. He parked 2 blocks away from the empty plot where Parcel B began nothing but cracked sidewalks, sagging streetlights, and the faint smell of old paint and smoke in the wind. He walked slowly past the chain-link fence, hands in his coat pockets. The quiet here was different than in the skyscrapers. It wasn't stillness, it was neglect. And then he heard a familiar voice. "Mr. Hayes?" He turned. Maya was sitting on a bench beneath a flickering street lamp, hoodie pulled up, earbuds in one hand, a thick manila folder in the other. "You come here often?" she asked, half smiling. He nodded. "Used to. Years ago. This was one of our first neighborhoods for housing rehabilitation. Before the board got greedy." She patted the bench beside her. "Sit. It's not as dangerous as people say." He chuckled once and joined her. She handed him the folder. "Everything I could find on the dummy companies. The addresses, the routing numbers, and even a few names I think are fake. One guy listed on 4 different filings. She's a barber downtown. Doesn't know a thing." Malcolm looked at her for a long moment. "You know you're 16, right?" She shrugged. "Google's free." Then, after a pause, "You really going to stop them?" "I'm going to try," he said, "but I won't do it alone." Maya leaned back on the bench. "That's good, because I didn't plan on staying quiet." And there, under the dim halo of a broken light, a girl who had no reason to speak truth to power became his fiercest ally. The next morning, Malcolm entered his office early before the elevators filled with polished shoes and sharp suits, before anyone could catch his expression and ask questions he wasn't ready to answer. He was done answering. From here forward, he would be the one asking. The photos, zoning inconsistencies, and shell company data were now in the hands of Tara Mendez. But something was still off. Too many missing emails, too many misplaced files on the shared company server. The deeper he tried to pull the thread, the more tangled it became. Then, just before 7 a.m., his office door cracked open. "Sir," Jordan said, stepping in hesitantly. "Something happened." Malcolm looked up. "What kind of something?" Jordan closed the door behind him. "Your executive account was locked out of the financial archives. It flagged it at 2:14 a.m. Access permissions changed remotely." Malcolm stiffened. "Who else has admin authority?" "Only you and Celeste." Within the hour, Malcolm was standing outside the IT server room, arms crossed, as the head technician tried not to sweat through his shirt. "We've recovered most of the logs," the tech said, adjusting his glasses. "But someone deleted the backup access history from last night. Like, scrubbed it clean. We've only seen this kind of overwrite when an account is being used as a front." Malcolm's voice dropped. "Are you telling me someone's spoofing my credentials?" "Yes, sir. And if they did it from inside the network, they're very good." He turned toward Jordan. "Get me Tara. Now. And check the status of our non-disclosure agreements with Ellison's company. I want to know if any were amended this week without board approval." Jordan hesitated. "Malcolm, you should know something else. Someone filed an anonymous complaint with the Department of Buildings, accusing you of insider manipulation related to Parcel B." Malcolm blinked. "They're trying to bury me before I can bury them." That afternoon, he met Tara in the underground parking lot again. They stood between his car and a steel support column, the only light coming from the dusty amber glow of overhead fluorescence. "I've started compiling the evidence," she said, flipping open a thick manila folder. "It's enough for the district attorney to open an investigation. But if you want charges to stick, we need someone inside." Malcolm nodded. "A whistleblower." "Yes, someone who can testify to internal knowledge someone they tried to pressure." He thought about Jordan, about the way his assistant had paused before every answer lately. Loyal but afraid. Still watching both sides of the line. "I might know someone," Malcolm said, "but we'll need to protect them." That evening, he found himself parked outside Jordan's apartment building. The city lights reflected off his windshield as he sat in silence, watching the traffic blur by. Finally, he got out, walked up the steps, and knocked. Jordan answered after a moment, surprised and uneasy. "Can I come in?" Malcolm asked. Inside, the apartment was modest books stacked neatly, records in a crate, half a bottle of scotch by the sink. Jordan gestured to the couch. "Malcolm, is this about the files?" "It's about the truth," Malcolm said. "I think you already know you're sitting in the middle of it." Jordan looked down. "I didn't mean to be involved. I was told to stay quiet. Just follow the version Celeste gave me. And Ellison, he said if I raised questions, I'd lose everything." Do you have proof?" Jordan stood and opened a cabinet, pulling out a flash drive. "I copied some of the original messages, and one recording from a call. He didn't know I was still on the line." He handed it over, voice trembling. "I want to do the right thing, but if this goes public, you'll be protected," Malcolm said firmly. "You're not the villain here, Jordan, but if you don't speak up, they'll pin this on you without blinking." Jordan nodded, slowly. "Tell me what to do." "Oh." By the time Malcolm returned to his office that night, he felt the shift. For the first time, he had someone on the inside ready to flip the narrative. He pulled out the flash drive, loaded the contents onto a secured system, and played the recording. It was Ellison's voice, smug, confident. "Malcolm's too careful, but if we funnel it through Jordan, he'll just sign off. He doesn't ask questions. Celeste said we just need 2 more weeks. After that, who cares what the zoning says? Public trust has a short memory." Malcolm sat back, the words echoing in his chest like a slow explosion. They had used his assistant, used his name, used the trust he built for decades as a shield for their lies. He stared at the Chicago skyline outside, glowing like a field of coals. Below that light, thousands of working families still lived on borrowed hope. He wouldn't let them be erased. Not for greed, not for power. His phone buzzed again, a message from Maya. "They showed up again tonight, different car, just watching. But I wrote down the license plate." Malcolm's jaw clenched. It was time to escalate. He picked up the phone and dialed Tara. "Get me a meeting with the district attorney," he said. "Tomorrow morning. Bring everything. Witness statement, recording, fake contracts, shell LLCs. I want it all on the table." "And what about Celeste?" Tara asked. Malcolm looked down at the wedding ring he still kept in a drawer. Unworn, unmoved, but never quite forgotten. He closed the drawer with a soft thud. She made her choice. The hallway outside the State Ethics Commission was quieter than Malcolm expected. No reporters, no board members, just the sterile hum of overhead lights and the polished echo of his footsteps against cold stone floors. He carried nothing but a leather folder. No assistants, no entourage. Tara was already inside, preparing the evidence presentation. Jordan had agreed to testify but would do so under protected status. The city had granted confidentiality until formal charges were confirmed. Still, the weight Malcolm carried was heavier than paperwork. This was more than just a hearing. It was a reckoning. At 9 a.m. sharp, the commission doors opened, and Malcolm stepped inside. The chamber was modest wood-paneled, American flag at one corner, a long dais of 5 stern-looking commissioners in dark suits. Their faces betrayed nothing. Across the room sat Mark Ellison, flanked by 2 lawyers. He wore a pinstripe suit and a relaxed, amused expression, as if this were just another breakfast meeting. And next to him was Celeste, her hair pinned high, her lipstick immaculate, no flash of regret in her eyes, just precision, still playing her part. Malcolm took his seat beside Tara, who gave him a single, firm nod. "It begins now," she whispered. The chairperson, a woman named Honorable Elise Monroe, adjusted her glasses, and began. Mr. Hayes, you've requested an emergency hearing regarding potential fraud tied to public-private development proposals in the South Side Corridor. You've submitted documentation and a sworn witness statement. Today, we'll hear your account. Malcolm rose slowly. He didn't clear his throat, didn't adjust his jacket. He just spoke. 3 weeks ago, I was presented with a contract that looked like the future of urban revitalization. It came from someone I had reason to trust, Mark Ellison, and was co-endorsed by my former partner, Celeste Hayes. The proposal was beautiful, impeccable on the surface, but it was a lie, not just a mistake, a design deception. Zoning records were falsified, budget lines rerouted to dummy corporations, documents hidden, altered, and buried under red tape. He turned slightly to the commissioners, eyes steady. And the reason I'm here today isn't because I uncovered it myself. It's because a 16-year-old girl, Maya Williams, saw something no one else did. She spoke up, she showed me the cracks. And from there, we followed the rot back to its source. Tara stepped forward next, submitting folders of evidence. Contracts with redlined sections, emails, city filings, and most damning, the recorded phone call between Ellison and an unnamed associate, referencing Jordan by name and detailing their plan to push the deal through. The commissioners reviewed the documents silently. Elise Monroe's brow furrowed deeper with each page. Then she asked, "Is the whistleblower present?" Tara replied, "He's submitted a confidential deposition, Your Honor, and we have a second statement from Maya Williams, submitted by her legal guardian. She's a minor and not present today." Ellison scoffed quietly. "So we're taking urban planning advice from high schoolers now?" Monroe's gavel tapped once. "Mr. Ellison, this isn't a comedy club." Celeste finally spoke. "With all due respect, this sounds like professional paranoia dressed up as moral outrage. Zoning law changes frequently, and this entire spectacle is built on interpretations and hearsay." Tara responded coldly. "Then let's allow the city's zoning commission and the Department of Revenue to decide whether misreporting land use and filtering payments through shell companies is a simple misunderstanding." Ellison's lawyer leaned in and whispered something. Mark's expression dropped half a degree. The commission recessed for deliberation. Malcolm stepped into the hallway, leaning against the wall as if it held him up. Tara joined him. "You did well." He gave a tired half smile. "I just told the truth. That's rare enough in these rooms," she said. Minutes later, the doors reopened. The commission returned with a decision. Chairwoman Monroe's voice was steady. "Based on the evidence presented, we are freezing all development actions tied to Parcel B and initiating a formal investigation into fraudulent misrepresentation, including potential criminal referrals to the district attorney's office. Additionally, both Mr. Ellison and Miss Hayes are subject to immediate suspension from future city contract consideration, pending the results of said investigation." Ellison turned pale. Celeste stared straight ahead, jaw locked tight. Malcolm didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply sat in silence, letting the judgment echo through the room. Outside, a few reporters had gathered by the time he emerged. One called out, "Mr. Hayes, is it true a teenage girl exposed this fraud?" Malcolm paused, then nodded. "She did," he said. "She saw what the rest of us didn't. And she had the courage to speak when others stayed quiet." "Will she be part of your company now?" another asked. Malcolm smiled, just bodily. "She already is," he replied. "She's part of the reason we're still standing." That evening, Malcolm returned to his office. He removed the framed photo of the original Hayes Global groundbreaking from the shelf him and Celeste, smiling in front of a half-built foundation. He placed it in a drawer, then opened another. Inside was a fresh folder, embossed in silver. Williams Future Fund, Est, 2024. It wasn't just a gesture, it was a course correction. A company built on vigilance, on truth, and on the voice of a girl who refused to look away. 3 days after the Ethics Commission froze all action on Parcel B, federal agents raided Ellison's downtown office. It was swift, clinical, and silent. No sirens, no drama. Just a team of agents in dark jackets with sealed warrants and steel briefcases walking past reception, asking no questions. Mark Ellison wasn't there when they arrived, but his assistant was. So was his server. By noon, every drive, document, and signed form with Ellison's initials had been confiscated under suspicion of contractual fraud, zoning manipulation, and misuse of public infrastructure funds. The story broke by evening. Front page of the Chicago Tribune. Developer accused of multi-million-dollar fraud. Hayes Global CEO refused to sign off. Inside the boardroom, the energy was radioactive. Some directors congratulated Malcolm in private. Others stayed quiet, eyes low. No one openly admitted they'd pushed him to sign that deal, but they all knew they had. Malcolm didn't ask for apologies. He simply met with the legal team and stripped Ellison's name from every related contract. Then, with quiet efficiency, he directed HR to begin an internal audit of every employee connected to the project, including finance, permitting, and corporate counsel. And Celeste? She resigned. No public letter, no press statement, just a simple, 2-line email. Effective immediately. I will be stepping down from all active and advisory roles within Hayes Global. I wish you clarity and courage in all things ahead. Malcolm sat at his desk, rereading that line over and over. Clarity and courage. 2 things she hadn't shown a shred of during the entire scandal. He closed the email, then deleted it. Meanwhile, Jordan Lee, once the unsure assistant, became a quiet warrior. With Tara's help, he submitted a sworn deposition outlining the pressure he'd faced, the instructions he was given, and how Ellison's voice on that recording matched the tone of every late-night directive he'd ever received. It wasn't easy. He lost sleep, friends, trust in himself. But the day the news broke, Malcolm called him into his office and said just 4 words. "You did the right thing." Jordan didn't reply, he just nodded, eyes glassy. But not everyone took the exposure well. By week's end, Malcolm's security team had logged 3 separate incidents. A brick through the company's glass front door. A car tailing Maya and her mother for 4 city blocks before peeling away. An anonymous letter sent to Malcolm's home, postmarked out of state. No return address. No message, just a black and white photo of Lot 117A circled in red ink. Tara took it straight to federal investigators. "We're rattling the right tree," she told Malcolm. "But it's deeper than Ellison. Someone else signed off on those zoning changes. Someone in City Hall." Malcolm nodded grimly. "Then we keep going." The following Friday, a letter arrived in Maya's mailbox. Handwritten, formal, embossed with Hayes Global's gold seal. Her mother opened it first and nearly dropped the envelope. Maya read it quietly, expression still. Then she looked up. "I've been offered an internship," she said softly. "Paid, with a college scholarship attached. They want me in the research division starting this summer." Evelyn stared at her, wide-eyed. "You're 16. Maya smiled. "Yeah, but apparently, that's not too young anymore." Back in his office, Malcolm watched footage of a press conference held by the DA's office. Mark Ellison had been charged with wire fraud, attempted public land theft, falsification of documents, and obstruction of city process. Celeste had not been criminally indicted, but the DA made it clear, "This office will continue to investigate all parties who knowingly abetted the fraudulent use of city zoning for personal gain." That was enough. Malcolm knew what it meant. She'd been offered a deal, walk away, stay quiet, and the system wouldn't come for her. It was justice, not vengeance. And justice, even when quiet, still held weight. That evening, Hayes Global issued its official statement. "The integrity of our company rests not on profit, but on principle. When truth is threatened by greed, it's the smallest voices that often save the loudest institutions. We honor those voices." They didn't mention Maya by name, but everyone in the room knew. As Malcolm prepared to leave for the night, he stopped by the new division on the 18th floor. The door plaque was freshly installed. Williams Youth, Initiative, Legal Research and Urban Integrity Division. Inside, a group of college interns and young analysts sat hunched over maps, zoning codes, and development proposals, each one cross-checking data with quiet focus. And in the corner, Maya stood beside a whiteboard, jotting notes from a call. Her sleeves were rolled. Her braid was tucked behind one ear. She looked up and saw him through the glass. She smiled. Not wide, but real. Malcolm nodded once. A silent promise. "I see you. I trust you. Keep going." And with that, he turned and walked away. Past the conference room, past the blueprint displays, past the old logo that once bore only his initials. Now, it bore legacy, shared, guarded, and earned. 6 weeks later, spring arrived in Chicago like a breath of redemption, warm, slow, and filled with the scent of thawing concrete and blooming magnolias along the edges of the city parks. For Malcolm Hayes, it wasn't just a change of season, it was a turning point. Hayes Global had weathered its greatest internal storm and survived. The press still circled like vultures, of course. Headlines came and went, sometimes celebratory, sometimes skeptical, but what endured quietly, steadily was the work, the reform, the message that they weren't just another development firm anymore. They were a watchdog, a wall, a promise. On a mild Thursday morning, Malcolm stood in front of a modest podium in the atrium of the Chicago Civic Center, a navy blue suit pressed to perfection, a silver pin of the new Williams Initiative on his lapel. Cameras flashed, reporters murmured. Employees, city council members, local parents, and students filled the glass-paneled hall behind him. But all he focused on was the girl sitting in the front row, hands clasped, eyes calm. Maya Williams, 16, sharp as ever, and now the youngest legal research associate in Hayes Global history. Behind her sat her mother, Evelyn, quietly proud, fingers laced tight like a prayer she'd never spoken out loud. Malcolm adjusted the microphone and began. 6 months ago, our company nearly signed a contract that would have cost this city millions and worse, would have displaced hundreds of families in one of our most vulnerable communities. The proposal was polished, elegant, endorsed by experts. But it was a lie, and the only reason we're standing here today is because someone dared to point at the truth. Not a lawyer, not a politician, not a CEO, a 16-year-old girl with no power, no title, and no seat at the table. But she saw the flaw, and she spoke. He paused. In honor of that courage, today we announce the official founding of the Williams Future Fund, a full tuition scholarship and civic mentorship program for inner-city youth interested in law, urban development, and public ethics. Because integrity can't wait until adulthood. And sometimes justice starts in a hallway with a janitor's daughter saying, "Don't sign that." Applause filled the room. Not polite, not staged, real. Maya didn't smile widely, but her eyes glowed with something steadier than joy. Purpose. Malcolm stepped aside. A young staffer handed Maya a microphone. She hesitated just long enough for the room to quiet again. Then she spoke, not with grandiosity, but with the same quiet clarity that had once stopped a CEO mid-signature. "I didn't plan to speak that day," she said. "I didn't even think anyone would listen." A few quiet chuckles rippled through the crowd. "I just saw something that didn't make sense, and I couldn't unsee it. My mom always taught Maya, if something feels wrong, don't walk past it. I didn't fix anything by myself, but I didn't stay quiet either. And I guess sometimes, that's where justice begins." After the event, Maya stepped out onto the Civic Center steps beside Malcolm. The city stretched before them alive, loud, messy as ever. But under it all, something had shifted. "Maya," Malcolm said, his voice lower now, more personal. "Do you know what you've done?" She looked up at him. "I did what anyone would do." He smiled. "Number, you did what most people wouldn't. And because of that, you changed the direction of this entire company." She shrugged. "I just didn't want you to sign a mistake." Malcolm turned slightly toward her. "There are two kinds of power in this world. The kind that speaks first, and the kind that speaks last." He paused. "You're the second kind. That's the one that lasts longer." Later that evening, Malcolm returned to his office alone. The city outside glimmered through the tall windows like an ocean of restless stars. He poured a glass of bourbon but didn't drink it. Instead, he opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside, the contract Ellison's deal still sat, unsigned, unshredded. Just there, a reminder. Beside it was Maya's original folder, the one with the hand-marked zoning maps, the one that had changed everything. He pulled it out, placed it in a slim display frame, and stood it on the shelf. A symbol, not of risk, but of reckoning. At 10:04 p.m., his phone buzzed. A text from Tara Mendez. "Indictments for Ellison finalized. DA pushing forward. Additional names emerging. We'll keep pressing." Malcolm replied with 2 words. "Don't stop." Then he leaned back in his chair, stared at the skyline, and whispered to himself, "Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it just points. And when it does, the wise ones listen."